Hey, friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
And welcome back to Going In Raw, the only pro wrestling podcast you need to be listening to right here at youtube.com/Steve and Larson. Available wherever podcasts can be found, and of course, taped live at the Twitch, twitch.tv/Steve and Larson. So we figured we'd do like a special little dealy here because we didn't know what to make heading into today's Pat McAfee interview with Vince McMahon. It was roughly an hour and a half long.
Yeah.
None of it seemed scripted. It was just a really, really interesting conversation between Pat McAfee and a guy that really seems to like Pat McAfee, Vince McMahon. I wonder if we'll get part of me wonders if this is like a bit of a warm-up act for what we might see more of, given that Vince documentary is coming up, and Vince might, in order to promote it and et cetera, might be doing more of these types of things. Or maybe this is going to be it for him because he really likes Pat McAfee, and they announced that he was offered live on the show a spot at WrestleMania.
Yeah. There's two huge announcements. They're billing one as a huge announcement. It is Vince McMahon just doesn't get on stage to talk about anybody. You know, he doesn't do that a lot, especially at this point in his career.
Yeah.
So we learned that Pat was offered a Mania match by Vince, and I also learned that Vince is going to induct The Undertaker into the WWE Hall of Fame. I believe he's only ever inducted one other person. Is that Stone Cold?
Yes, that's what he. Yeah, and that's what he said on the show.
So it's kind of a huge deal. Vince talked at pretty decent length about how close he is with The Undertaker, how much The Undertaker means to him, and he describes it as as a difficult thing to do because yes, he knows there's the character of The Undertaker, but he is close with Mark Calloway and the man behind the character. Yeah. And he says I could talk about The Undertaker fine forever, but talking about Mark Calloway, that's going to be more difficult, I think, in terms of him not getting emotional. Yeah.
The context of that conversation as well, when he was talking about The Undertaker, because Pat was talking up The Undertaker, there was quite a lot of insight about Vince McMahon's creative process, which to you and I is always the more interesting things about pro wrestling, the creative aspect behind it. And you know, when talking about The Undertaker, a person who is famously known for keeping kayfabe whenever he's outside the ring, Vince McMahon had kind of a counter to that, because that aspect wasn't really brought up, but he says, you know, people that commit to their character while the cameras are rolling are the ones that usually have the biggest chance of getting over. And when they step away, they're not that person. And he explicitly said when he wasn't wrestling, he was Mark Calloway. He was the human being. Whereas popularly, he's been known as the guy who is The Undertaker inside and out. And he even spoke about that in his own documentary. The last ride? The last dance was Jordan.
Yeah, how he go out in public and he was still in character. And Pat talked about that. I know when Vince was talking about the dichotomy of being your character versus being yourself and not getting those two confused. Because he mentions people have done that. Yeah. And knowing where that delineation is and knowing when to step away from the character, not bringing that character home. And I wonder when Vince was talking about that, I know he said in front of the cameras, he's The Undertaker. Outside of the ring, he's not. I wonder if he just meant that Undertaker didn't take that character home with him. Yeah. Because we've seen stuff of him outside of the ring, very much seemingly being at least some approximation of his character.
Well, I wonder if it's also a difference in just their relationship. Like, I'm not sure how much of The Undertaker Mark Calloway is going to be when he walks up to Vince and discusses story ideas and stuff. Maybe Vince is one of the few people who he knows, I can drop this. You know, I can drop the Undertaker gimmick and just be myself to Vince. I mean, Vince is the guy that called him up and said, that was my favorite Undertaker story. You know, after being dumped on in WCW and being told you're never going to draw a dime. I mean, that one moment where Vince calls him and says, "Is this the Undertaker?" I think at that point, Vince had Mark Calloway for life. I think no matter what else happened, he was never going to leave Vince McMahon because he had the respect to call him up and be like, "You're my guy. You're this character, which
Yeah.
I would think to a lot of people would feel really good to just be wanted.
Yeah. I would think so. Going back to the talk about the creative process, because Pat really talked to him about that, and Vince was talking about how he approaches things from a creative vantage point. He talks about having multiple wheels turning in his head. He says at any given moment he can have 1, 2, maybe 3. And he talked about how where he's facing one creative decision and he's focused on it, but maybe not sure exactly what's going to happen. Then he gets distracted by something else, has to deal with that, comes back. Now he's got to do fresh set of eyes to view this creative decision he make. Maybe he learned something from the previous conversation that can apply to here. He still seems very, at 76 years old, very energized about the creative process. And he spoke at length about having a focus group every week, the live audience, and how he always listens to them. You got to give the audience what they want, which, he could say that. There's been times, though, where it definitely seems like he hasn't been necessarily listening to the audience.
Well, okay, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of the more interesting dichotomies that he was sort of presented with, and he kind of stumbled over, is when he said, we have a focus group every night when we run shows. You can gauge the crowd. And he spoke about two different things. There's sort of like the wrestlers themselves and their focus group waiting for reactions, et cetera, et cetera. But Vince talked about them being his own focus group. And Pat McAfee said, did you pay more attention to social media during the Thunderdome days? And Vince sort of had to sit there and think, and he was like, well, I can see the reactions. And that was
first he kind of says, but I can see the reactions. Yeah.
That was very illustrative, because it's like, that's sort of, I think that speaks maybe more to the truth of it, where Vince, to a degree, will pay attention to what the live crowd is doing. But I feel like Vince pays attention more to his gut than anything else.
Yeah. There was another thing where he talked about a certain portion of, I think he was talking more so about, internet chatter about this.
Oh, yeah.
Where he says, well, those people, I don't listen to that.
That's the old Bruce thing that he had said during his, back in the 90s, when everybody was huge on the internet for Shawn Michaels, and that's really when the internet was becoming popular, as 95, 96, 97.
Yeah.
When, everybody on the internet loved Shawn Michaels and wanted to see him as a good guy. And Bruce was like, well, if the internet wanted it, we knew to do the opposite. We knew not to do what the internet wanted, what that fan base wanted. Mm-hmm. And that still seems to be the perception, even though even the internet itself has changed so drastically. And your fan base being there, your more passionate, hardcore fan base being there, it's still interesting that it seemingly they still view the internet as, well, it's not a legitimate place to get feedback.
Yeah,
to a degree.
Yeah.
So that was actually very interesting.
A lot of people are already talking about Pat mentioning AEW to Vince, specifically talking about competition, talked about WCW back in the day. He mentions TNA, he mentions Impact. He says AEW, they just bought Ring of Honor. And he asked Vince, the reputation you have is that competition makes you better. And Vince straight up says, I enjoy confrontation. It puts me on my toes. That was my background. We've heard this before. He got in a lot of fights when he was young.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of sharpened him for confrontation, as he puts it.
Yeah.
And he didn't mention anything about AEW directly.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. The only reference he made to the Monday Night Wars in that was talking about The Undertaker, mm-hmm. because he said, when he's talking about The Undertaker prior, was he valued Undertaker's loyalty.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And he said at no point did he and The Undertaker ever have a conversation. Neither of them ever brought up to the other about Undertaker going to WCW.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, he did. He talked very briefly. There was not nearly the discussion about that aspect of things, about the competition aspect of things that I was hoping for. But, he did paint it as a David and Goliath situation. Turner had a ton of money, and I never really did. He said it was all cash flow.
Well, that was more. I thought that was more so in the territory days.
He talked about that in the territory days, but he also referred to that when it came to Turner. You know, those guys had a ton of money to spend. I mean, the billionaire Ted thing at the time, Vince wasn't. He wasn't that. Now things have significantly changed. But I mean, just the fact that Pat would mention AEW, I mean, that's a big nothing right there. I mean, it's Vince as Vince. I do not believe, and I don't think I mean, just by the numbers, I don't think he has to consider AEW real competition, because WWE is worth just billions and billions, or they're worth a lot more than AEW is. Now, will that change in 5 years? Who knows? But yeah, I mean, just the fact that Pat would mention that in the same breath as Impact. I mean, it would be condescending to have to tiptoe around, I would think, the concept that there is an AEW.
Yeah.
But people aren't used to hearing AEW be said in the same room as a Vince McMahon.
I know. And that's one thing. Pat did a fantastic job, I think, for the most part during this interview. It didn't feel like he held anything back, per se. There is some questions he asked in probably a fairly diplomatic manner, like the one about releasing talent.
I mean, look, Pat McAfee is
at the same time, I should say this, as someone who works for WWE, that was about as hard-hitting as an interview you can expect of Vince McMahon.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, you can take the tact. Vince McMahon is a polarizing individual for many reasons. And you can see there are two Vince McMahons. There is the guy that Pat McAfee talked to today, and Pat McAfee spoke no lies when he would talk to Vince in the way he would. A legend, a pioneer, a guy who basically is pro wrestling. And then there is the Vince McMahon that we all criticize, the guy who, you know, thinks he's pro wrestling and et cetera, and thinks he knows better than us and doesn't pay attention to the collective us. Doesn't know what to do with this guy. Puts this guy in a room, which, by the way, Pat McAfee even mentioned Aleister Black, and as a way of asking, you know, what kind of creative leeway do you give, you know, your wrestlers? And Vince says, well, if they have an alternative, I will listen to it, and if it's a better one, we'll run with it. And we've heard that before in the past as well.
Yeah. You know, I think really the only area of conversation where Pat maybe could have hit a little bit harder, so maybe the Saudi Arabia the aspect of it. He brought up in terms of a business thing, and Vince kind of skirted around the moral aspect of it.
Well, what was interesting there, and I've heard this counter plenty of times, and there is I think there is a delineation, there is a difference in my eyes, but you know, the idea that WWE is doing business directly with Saudi Arabia, but Vince sees it as to bring a popular product to the people of Saudi Arabia. And he says nobody likes governments anywhere, including our own. And you know, we're not, the American government is far from clean. And just like the Saudi Arabia government is far from clean. Now, I think there probably are some differences you can point to in terms of the shades of gray, but that's neither here nor there. But it seems like when Vince brought that up, that might be the way he frames that.
Yeah. I mean, he said earlier on or elsewhere in the interview that, and I don't know, this might be in some way related to that or not, that once he took WWE public, it made him, in his mind, a better businessman because he had to take his own, essentially his own heart, his own emotion out of a lot of decisions. Mm-hmm. And so it made business decisions easier. In the context it was asked is about bringing in people who used to be with the company. Maybe at one point he was cursing their name, but he mentions Hogan. Mm-hmm. Down the line, it made sense from a business perspective to bring it back in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm sure in a lot of respects, there is that delineation in his mind. This is better for business. This government's paying us millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. That's good for the business. Everything else in his mind takes a back seat. And when it comes to the business, he even talks about, Pat brings up Succession, the TV show, which popped me huge.
Yeah, right.
We make that comparison all the time.
Yeah, sure.
And he essentially asked Vince, what's the future of the company?
Yeah.
Essentially after you have those discussions. And Vince says, no, I don't really think about it that much. He says the business is best for everybody. You have to treat it as such. You have to treat you can treat your family members like any other employees. And he even says sometimes I might be even rougher on my family members in that respect. He says, but if they're not working out, they shouldn't be part of the business.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like when it comes to business, there's business.
Yeah.
And that has its own little spot in his brain, and that is away from everything else.
Well, what you're talking about is exactly right. I mean, that's one thing that we've always sort of known, but the ability for him to compartmentalize is really fascinating. To be able to, when he's asked about the releases, to be able to say, well, I think about our audience, and if somebody's not pulling their weight, it's like there is no human aspect there. It's one thing. And if you're not on board 1,000%, then you're going to fall by the wayside. And he does seem to believe that the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of a thing. And the superstars that succeed are the ones who are putting in. Now that's the nebulous brass ring philosophy, where it's like, well, what exactly are you looking for? Because therein lies the Kafkaesque aspect of Vince McMahon. Like, I'm supposed to understand what weird thing that you want on this given day, time, minute, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's interesting that he's able to do that, where a lot of, the level of, it's interesting because he sort of talks about, and I wonder if they're going to go more into his childhood in the documentary.
I would
imagine. Would think they would.
Yeah.
Because he was very reluctant. He said, you don't want to hear about, another sad childhood story.
Yeah. And the little he mentioned it here seems like, at least in his mind, whether that's his own creation myth or not, framed in a lot of ways who he is now.
Yeah, sure.
So without that context, it might be kind of hard to understand who Vince McMahon eventually became and who he currently is.
Yeah.
Because, as mentioned, the Saudi Arabia question, I kind of wish Pat would have had a follow-up there after Vince gave his initial answer and said he kind of moved on. It's kind of the same thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I wonder if I wonder if there's anything to mine there, given that they have developed such a staunch company line, literally on the superstars' social media.
Yeah, I know.
WWE is influencing the world.
Yeah.
That is where they go, or I would suspect that's where they would go if pressed at all.
Yeah.
Look at what we've been able to accomplish there. That outweighs. And I don't disagree that maybe he should have pressed more. I just wonder how much would he have gotten, given that the company has the PR lines available.
No, I understand all that. Between that and when Pat does ask about releasing talent, Vince kind of veers off into this answer about Hogan, about listening to the audience, giving them what they want. People who leave here sometimes just blame Vince for, how their WWE tenure might have come up a bit short. But we never, when there's a question about business, Vince answers it from a business standpoint. When there's a question about himself, he answers it in a far more personable way.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Throughout this, you see this really stark delineation, because we know that Vince has gotten close with wrestlers.
Mm-hmm, yeah, sure.
He talks about how highly he thinks of Undertaker. How many people did he describe as very good human beings?
Oh, that's his thing. Yeah, that was his thing today. It's like, when Pat says Pat mentioned Bruce, he mentioned Kevin Dunn. He says people I've gotten to know, and Vince stops and he says, and also incredible human beings.
Yeah.
And the one gag was when Pat brings up Michael Cole. Oh, just a piece of shit, just an awful person. By the way, it was great to hear Vince curse so much in this. Him dropping F-bombs is really a delight.
It was. So, like, you just in this one interview, you see the dichotomy of Vince. You see what a lot of people say is a very personable, at times warm individual.
Mm-hmm.
But then, depending on the question, on the topic, it can go back and forth. Where you're talking about something more business oriented, you're gonna get business Vince.
Yeah.
You're talking about something that, in terms of the relationships he's built with people, you might get the personable Vince.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see like how he frames the family through the business lens as opposed to the personal lens.
Even Pat says, you're going to get some heat for that answer.
Yeah. Yeah. The one question that I wish that he would have pressed more on, and the one that really bums me out because I would love to know the answer, and that's what decisions have you made creatively that you regret, that you wish you hadn't. And
he did ask that.
No. That he would have pressed more on because Vince said, I don't like to dwell on the negative. And I so wish Pat would have said, come on, throw me a bone, throw me one story idea, even an insignificant one. Even giving Vince and I the opportunity to tell a funny story about something, creatively speaking, that didn't work, that he wished he had done differently. But Vince basically shut it down and said, I don't like to deal with the negative. I wish he could have pressed a little bit more on that, because I wonder if maybe that's something that there's not really a company line for, and Vince could have come up with something. I would have liked to have pressed a little bit more.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. A lot of the things, like Vince kept on talking about double negatives. Mm-hmm. And listening to this, you could tell 1,000% he has written every one of his things with Austin Theory.
Oh, that stuff is legit. That stuff is stuff that he firmly believes. That is
basically Vince's philosophy on life, is everything he's telling Austin Theory. That's what it seems like.
You're absolutely right. Somebody here had it right when he talked about RI Wrestling fan here says, my favorite bit of Vince advice was, if you're going to be late, make sure you look as good as you can, because if you're late and look like shit, that's a double negative.
Yeah.
He's good. Yeah. And he went into a rant about how he hates people apologizing for being late, because if you're late.
That was literally a bit in the Austin Theory thing.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. And you could tell. And you and I had both sort of speculated on that when we talk about the Austin Theory office stuff, that this is just stuff that Vince wants to get off his chest. These are the quirks in life that he can't stand, and he's doing like a 90s stand-up routine on. And we talked about that.
It's observational humor.
It is, and it's through Vince's weird lens.
Yeah, it really is. Speaking of getting stuff off his chest, Pat asked him about his workout routine.
Yeah.
And Vince says it's like him working out is like his socially acceptable way to get out his aggression.
Yeah.
He says he does it just as much, if not more, for his head than his body. It helps him mentally so he can handle his workload and have to deal with people, as he puts it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
that was interesting. Yeah, he talked about, God dang, he talked about
putting on 11 plates.
11 plates, 1,000 pounds.
To squat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
That's crazy. He told this funny story. So this is back in the territory days. Like, he talked about going to St. Louis, trying to run a show, and whoever's running the territory there was not happy about it. So I guess several promoters from rival territories, I imagine NWA territories, were having some sort of meeting about how to deal with the Vince problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so this is a story that Jim Ross, told Vince. So JR is in the bathroom. Apparently he's in a stall. He's due to poop. And then 3 or 4 of the promoters walk in and talk about what are they going to do about Vince. And so JR is on the potty, and as Vince puts it, promoters are talking about offing Vince.
Yeah.
And JR is sitting on there, and he's like worried about being accessory to murder. So according to Vince, JR pulls his feet up onto the toilet seat as nature calls.
Yeah. And that popped Pat really big.
Yeah.
Yeah, those old days, those are nuts. I've been reading very, very slowly the book Death of the Territories. Mm-hmm. And it's all just at a certain point it gets monotonous because it's just redundant, because it's just story up, just like, then he went here and he outlines the entire process of Vince buying up another territory, and then he went here and he did this and he presented with a check of this much, et cetera, et cetera. And it's crazy just how many territories he just either bought or put out of business by running nearby. But
yeah.
So yeah, that was interesting stuff. Interesting that it didn't take him very long to come up with the new name. He talked about the WWF versus, coming up with the WWE, how it took about 20 to 30 minutes to just come up with that and to get the F out thing.
Yeah. When Vince offered Pat his WrestleMania match, he was clear to mention that now Vince has to find an opponent for him.
Yes, yeah. So then, and that's the thing. I'm really glad they didn't film like a thing on the show because like when Pat was talking about, oh, he's going to be late here. He said, hold on, I'm getting a call. And my mind immediately was like, oh, this is where the bit starts. And then he said, people are going to think that I'm working right now, that this is a work right here. Mm-hmm. But it did just seem to be like they were prepping him for Vince to show up because he was a little bit late.
Yeah, that was great when he got that phone call. And he was like, the co-hosts were like, what is that about? They know what they're getting into.
Yeah.
And Pat was like, no, they don't.
Yeah.
They're asking if he had to be mic'd up. It's like, no, we all set up. All you have to do is walk in the studio, sit down. It's good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like it seems like even his co-hosts were waiting for the work to kick in. They started pumping it up also. And,
in fact, AJ at one point says something like something about the program you have.
Yeah.
Prior to it showing up.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
One aspect of Vince's answer, I just noticed this on social media again, about talking about released talents is because Pat asked him about it, or some releasing talents, pushing people, so on and so forth. Some of those decisions are more difficult than others. And Vince says, he's more concerned about the audience wants. And he says something about sometimes some people, as he put it, are dead weight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That was sort of the most inflammatory thing that I think he said, because I know my ears perked up too when he said some people are dead weight.
But then he pivoted to, but you got to think about what's best for business. And he says, if the audience wants Hogan back, you bring him back.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And that's what he talks about once making the company public. Better businessman because he stopped making decisions based on emotion.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
This is compartmentalization where apparently he has to make.
Yeah. Yeah. System Zero here in chat says most important part of the interview was Vince saying he doesn't watch Young Rock.
Yeah,
but he does. I mean, Pat was asking him about all the stars that he made. They talked about Brock briefly. Vince talked about Brock, said he's a really smart businessman. And his face sort of lit up a little bit when talking about Brock. So you can see that, the Brock, I wonder, Brock saying outright on the Pat McAfee show that he considered Vince like a father figure. You can see the other side of that. You can see Vince taking that to heart, because as soon as he mentioned Brock, his face sort of lit up. Mm-hmm. They were having issues with his mic, just like with Brock.
Yeah, I kept smacking it. It was interesting that when Vince first walked in there, he seemed a little more guarded. Just his body language.
Mm-hmm.
He had his hand up by his lapel.
Sort of a weird, like, it's a very open, like, you don't have a table to sit behind. Like, he's sort of just sitting there open in a chair like this. And it is a very vulnerable. The other guys that are there's two guys behind a glass pane. There's another guy behind a desk. There's two guys behind a desk. And then Pat, of course, is like the most fidgety.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a whirlwind of energy there.
Yeah, exactly. Drinking his liquid death. But the interviewee is just out there,
Yeah.
And so it seems like it's not the most.
Brock did break that little table they had.
I know, but that seemed like such a bit of business for him. Like, what is this? It's an awkward setup that they have.
I know it is.
Which is bizarre. Yeah. They just need to tighten up the mic arm because it keeps on swinging all over the place.
Yeah, I know. White Brownie here says Vince talking about the reason calling the wrestlers superstars instead of professional wrestlers kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, even in the Death of the Territory books, they've been referring to it as sports entertainment for a very, very long time. Like, he wanted to advance from the territory days the idea of what a pro wrestler is, and so that's why they refer to him as superstars. I mean, he doesn't, and even Pat noted, he says, it's not like you shy away from the word wrestler. WrestleMania is literally the name of your biggest show. But Vince he just sees them as something more than that. And that's why he refers to them in that way. And I've always understood that. I don't think that it's necessary. Look, there are plenty of Vinceisms that are like, oh, don't do this, don't do that. Some of those are more fluid than others. Mm-hmm. But, the idea that, hey, these guys are more than pro wrestlers, don't call them that. They're superstars. I've never really taken an issue with that. I still sort of understand it. In sports entertainment, I mean, that term has been around for literally decades. Like, it didn't just pop up during the PG era. This has been a thing for a very long time.
It's been a thing for a while. It's been a thing for a while. Yeah. All in all, though, with a relatively insightful, wildly entertaining interview. like I said earlier, this is probably about as hard hitting as one can expect from someone who works in WWE, asking Vince questions that I would, nothing that I found shocking, but the candor with which Pat asked some of these interviews, I was like, oh, wow, good on you, Pat. Could have gone further in some other respects. Mentioned those before, the Saudi Arabia stuff, obviously, releasing talent. But by and large, I didn't feel like, for the most part, Pat, he didn't necessarily hold things back per se, but asked things in a fairly diplomatic manner.
Yeah, I think that's his thing. I don't think he's there to push buttons and to be Bob Costas.
No,
I don't think that's, that's not, I don't think that should be expected from him. I mean, look, we all want to think that we can get Vince McMahon in a rant room and like we all think that we'd like to be that guy, but that's not what this was. This was also interesting. I want to get your thoughts on this. Vince McMahon said that I'm reading this off of Denise Salcedo's Twitter feed here. The bit about Vince saying he finishes training at 3 a.m., starts at about 1:30 in the morning. What hours does he sleep?
Does he go to sleep afterwards then, or before?
I would assume like 3 to, if he sleeps 4 hours, 3 to 7 would make sense.
Yeah.
I guess it would be the very end of his day. He starts working out at 1:30.
Yeah, I would think so. That's interesting to work out the end of the day, but hey,
unless he just goes to bed a little, or like from what, 9. 10,
well, I mean,
11,
like
12,
on TV days, he wouldn't be able to.
Yeah,
that show doesn't end until 11 local.
That's a good point.
On the East Coast, 11 local time. So.
That's a good point. Yeah, probably from 3 to 7 then would be his sleep block,
or 4 to 8.
Yeah,
because I assume at 3 o'clock he's done. He goes home, showers, or goes to his hotel room, showers.
Yeah, I couldn't. I could 4 hours is I could not do. That's nuts to me.
I know
that a human body could do that.
I mean, he says he's wired differently, and that's obvious.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That is obvious.
Yeah,
like on the that level of compartmentalization, I couldn't do that. No, I don't know if I wouldn't want to do that regardless.
Oh, I couldn't do that. I'm not wired.
And I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to.
Emotionally speaking, it's not in me. Yeah.
No, it's not either.
Yeah. And I feel like because there's you wouldn't you also, this is getting kind of heavy, but wouldn't you have to compartmentalize like your conscience? Like your morals to a degree?
Well, I mean, that's, again, to a degree, that seems to be the case.
Yeah. I couldn't.
If business is business and that's it, then seemingly, yeah. And I couldn't, nor would I want to operate that way.
Yeah, that's not what I would classify as like a good human being.
No, I wouldn't either. I wouldn't.
But we all have our definitions, I guess. But yeah, this was good too. I like White Brownie mentioned Vince. Pat claims that Vince is not in his ear, that he just lets him do what he does. I think Vince is impressed by Pat. Pat, obviously, speaking about a guy who got the brass ring, to come from the Colts, and then hop into. I actually watched the other day. I watched Pat's first press conference. It was a jokey skit where it was a press conference, where he talked. He's retiring and he's hopping into Barstool to be a content guy. And even back then, you could tell his personality was off the charts. And to see him in the relatively short amount of time get to where he is now has to impress the hell out of Vince. Yeah. And when you're a guy who really impresses Vince, chances are he's going to let you do what you want to do.
So long as you do good work. And that's what Vince said. If I didn't like what you did, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So if Vince appreciates your journey, thinks you're a good human being, as he likes to put it, and he thinks you're good at your job, I think he'll give you more free reign because you've proven yourself that you can handle that.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least from the commentary's perspective, I feel like he's still a bit more controlling when it comes to the creative content of the show.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, there's probably a small handful of people from a creative standpoint who have that level of freedom.
Yeah. Quick question here from Monstrosity552, unrelated to the Vince thing. There was a report from I think Cassidy Hayes from Body Slam about a little clarification on Ring of Honor. It does seem like AEW at this point, according to Cassidy, that basically what we had speculated last night, Ring of Honor functioning as kind of the AEW's NXT would be the case. It seems they're going to run Ring of Honor as its own promotion, as a developmental type thing, which seems to make all the sense in the world. Like when you think about it, giving guys, I would assume people like Moriarty, maybe Daniel Garcia, guys that are going to be huge in like 5 years, the opportunity to build themselves to that level. I think that Tony Khan wants to sort of, there's the idea of like what we all wanted NXT to be and how cool that idea is. And Tony Khan looking at that idea and saying, that is a good idea. I can do that with Ring of Honor. So Monstrosity, with that being said, says, with AEW buying Ring of Honor, what does that mean for the Ring of Honor invasion of Impact? Kind of nothing. I get the feeling that Ring of Honor is going to be with few exceptions. I think the Briscoes will probably still be there. Gresham obviously is going to be the main guy there with the championship, but I get the feeling that it's going to be more AEW people there moving over to Ring of Honor than, for example, the people that are in Ring
Impact.
of Honor. Impact, the Honor No More guys.
Yeah, I assume the Honor No More thing is just those individuals went to Impact to work, and it's not like Ring of Honor said, all right, go, hey, do this.
Yeah.
You get our seal of approval. It was just more, here's a group of individuals that went to Impact to make some money, and this is the storyline they came up,
Yeah, I get, that's the feeling I get as well. I don't think the idea is going to be, let's try to appease the fans of the sad last days of Ring of Honor. Let's get some new, fresh excitement and show you guys what we're going to do. And we think that's probably going to be a bigger thing than it was in its last days before, this takeover, this purchase.
Yeah. And, I wonder now too, that they have the AEW has the studio they've been using in Orlando, the Universal Studios set for Dark. Is that the atmosphere? Maybe they'll set Ring of Honor in. I don't know. Are they going to shoot it? Are they going to shoot it before Rampage or Dynamite? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I would hope that they wouldn't do, because that's just sort of doing the ECW WWE thing.
Make it its own thing. Yeah,
I would
That'd be ideal.
Make it its own thing. That's that totally is I think the way to go. I mean, I have no idea. I maybe this would be a selling point for HBO Max. Hey, Ring of Honor on HBO Max. I don't know if it'd go on YouTube. Or if they'd somehow get a TV deal. We have no idea about that stuff.
No idea.
But yeah, we'll probably find out soon enough. But yeah, I would definitely like for it to be its own thing. I think that makes all the sense in the world.
Yep.
Yeah.
Try to keep the elements that made Ring of Honor special.
Mm-hmm.
The Code of Honor stuff, pure rules,
and freshen up the
presentation.
Yeah, the presentation. You can keep Ian, what's his last name? Riccaboni, is that his name?
Yeah.
He's definitely a legacy guy. You keep that guy for commentary, but yeah, it was it just felt so flat. The presentation, you gotta throw some
Spruce
shit.
it up a little bit.
Spruce it up. There you go. We'll end on this really quick. Let's say you get hit by a bus. Vince said
1 second.
in his last second, he'd just say thank you to the universe, apparently.
Yeah.
In your last second after getting hit by a bus, what would you do?
I'd probably say, fuck.
Yeah, same. I'd be like, ow!
Yeah.
What was it? Yeah, I'd poop
myself. Yeah,
I just pooped my
That'd probably be involuntary,
You just saw a man get hit by a bus and poop his pants. Yeah, I'd leave him laughing.
There you go.
Evie says, I hope Vince would say it like Chad Gable.
You.
Thank you. Did he just poop his pants? Shoosh. Oh, man. All right, anyway, that's going to do it for us. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in for this special episode of Going In Raw. Till next time, we'll talk to you later.
Goodbye.
All right. Should we take a break and do Numbers Don't Lie, or save that for tomorrow again?
We can do it. I can do it. You can do it right now.
Okay, cool. Let's do it right now then.
I just got to run the math real fast, and then we can rock and roll.
All right, we'll kill the stream, and then for subs only, we're going to be coming back with Numbers Don't Lie. So yeah, if you just want to hang out in our chat, it'll be no more than
A
5
matter of
minutes.
minutes.
Or so.
Matter of
Yeah.
minutes. Yes. Yes.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you in a second.
Goodbye.